Hey y'all, Boogie Night here, how's it going? And this review is almost a week overdue, so I apologize profusely. But it is not due to a lack of effort. Basically, after watching this movie, I needed to put a lot of time and thought into how I was going to present this particular review. Not because it was a bad movie, God no. Y'all know that if I've seen a bad flick, that review will be up and running probably within 3 hours of finishing watching it. But because this movie was so intricate, immersive, and intense. And I'm talking about a movie called The Wind That Shakes the Barley. Now, The Wind That Shakes the Barley was a 2006 historical drama work of fiction portraying the end of the Irish Revolution and the beginning of the Irish Civil War. I believe this movie took place somewhere in the early 1920s. It was directed by Ken Loach and starred Paulric Delaney, and Cilian Murphy. Now, Cilian Murphy, of course, y'all know him as Dr. Crane/Scarecrow from the Dark Knight trilogy, or as the egotistical future CEO person in Inception, as well as his myriad of other roles. But seeing him in this movie portrayed a whole different facet of Cilian Murphy's acting career, and I applaud him wholeheartedly for that. But that's just one of the many things. Now, of course, spoilers and a general plot overview will be at the end of this review, just because if y'all really don't want to hear it, or if you don't really want to hear about the gritty details, and believe me, gritty is a word that's going to come up quite a bit in this movie as well, or this review, as well as intense. But I do encourage y'all to see it, so this is something that might tickle your fancy. Maybe watch the trailer, and then if that still is something, definitely see it. I own it on DVD, so this will be part of my semi-regular rotation because I loved it, but I could probably best only in small doses. So, why do I keep talking about the intensity? Let me give you just a little bit of an example of what I mean by how intense it was. Motogues and I have watched a lot of movies together when we do our Critics Couch sessions, and when we watch a movie, we will spam the chat of somewhere between 50 to 100 plus comments total between the both of us, whether we're talking about the cinematography, whether things we liked, whether things that stood out for us, or if the movie is truly terrible, making lots of jokes back and forth with each other, just to kind of just cut the edge, so to speak. I don't think Motogues and I topped 30 comments total during this 2-hour plus movie, because that's how intense and how intricate it was. We would make the occasional small joke back and forth with each other just to kind of take the edge off a little bit, but for the most part, we were riveted, hook, line, and sinker to this movie. And of course, I mean, it's weird talking about it because, like I said, I love this movie, but certain scenes were just very hard to take. And that'll all be explained a little bit in the plot. I mean, these things, certain scenes border on the point of like, okay guys, dial it back. I understand this is this is based on actual events, not about Delaney and Murphy's characters, the O'Donovan brothers, but I'm like, I know this has probably happened, but I still at the same time, not to put my head in the sand, but I'm still like, oh my god, I really don't want to see this. And I've seen a lot of intense movies in my time frame. I'm just going to leave it at that. So anyway, so let's dig into the meat of this. The first thing that I really liked the most about it was the characters. Delaney and Murphy killed it. No pun intended. I don't think that this movie could have been done in such the way that it was if Murphy and Delaney were not at the helm as the O'Donovan brothers. It worked so well between the two of them. Just their interactions from the start to the finish, from the good times to the bad times and back again. It reminds me a lot of the interactions my own brother and I have. It was that brotherly bond, that brothers in arms, literally, that worked out completely. And their interactions with the other characters, whether it was one of the other, I'm not saying main characters, but another secondary character, Dan, I forget the actor's name, but he played Sir Davos in Game of Thrones, or Murphy's interactions with his girlfriend, Shanae, or Delaney's interactions with his team, with his with his mates and the revolution, with everybody else. It just all worked together perfectly. I thought it was so well done about that. It could have been a character they don't know, and I could think almost immediately about how it might be somebody I would interact with. So, I mean, I could relate to that on such a degree, and that was very immersive to me. The only real con that I had was, I mean, it's an Irish movie, of course. You're going to have Irish accents, but when they got excited, the Irish was so thick that it almost felt like a scene from The Godfather. I mean, this was one of the few jokes that I said to Morgus. I'm like, The Godfather says this, and he might have snickered at it, he might have just been humoring me, I don't know. But just thinking about that time frame, about the Irish Revolution, about the Irish Civil War, and how they would work together or work against each other, it all flowed really well with the plot. The second thing I really liked about this movie was the overall setting and the amount of effort that was put into portray such a setting. The cinematography wasn't much to sneeze at. It was pretty much your run-of-the-mill new bog standard. But whoever constructed the setting for that time frame hit the nail on the head. I think back to a lot of movies that I've seen that were based on historical time frames. Big one that stands out would be Braveheart, and I think they portrayed that overall structure very well. I think about the contrast and the comparison between upper class and lower class and how the hamlets were set up, the overall kind of grimy setup for the lower class, the overall kind of setting for the upper class, and just how that worked together. I mean, it got to the point that not saying there was a filter on the camera during some of the scenes to portray that overall timeline, that overall time frame, the overall here, there, and everywhere from urban to farmland, it's swamp and whatnot. But someone in editing dialed it back, that it really kind of had this very gritty look to it. Throughout the entire course of this movie, from start to finish, it had this film to it, no pun intended, that really, I thought, was spot on match. Special effects were something that was very good because they were so minimalistic. I want you to think back to a movie that had realistic special effects. And I think this kind of ties into the setting feature a little bit too. Think long and hard about it. What movies come to mind where the special effects were actually believable? Of course, I'm ruling out sci-fi movies or horror movies or anything like that because, well, you really can't believe that kind of special effects were taking place. Once again, I think about Braveheart. I think about Fort Apache, The Bronx. I think about movies like that. My Cousin Vinny. I think all of that kind of worked together very well. And this movie was no different at all. And that added, like I said, to the intensity to it. It drew me in even further. The next thing that I really liked about this was the character transformations. Both Cilian Murphy's character and Paul Rick Delaney's characters. I use the phrase coming-of-age movies quite a bit in my reviews, but this was no different. And Cilian Murphy's character starts out, and this is not really spoilerish because this doesn't really go into too much, starts out as this bright Irish doctor. He's going to go off and save lives at a hospital. This was his whole plan. He doesn't want to get involved with the Irish Revolution. He doesn't want to get involved in what's happening. And then he kind of sees, and this is within the first 20 minutes, he sees what the British are doing. He sees what they've done to his friends, to his family, to people he only is briefly associated with. And he gets more, and you see this kind of J-curve to him slowly about how he embraces his ideals and embraces what the foundation was of the revolution in itself. And I mean, it really was to the point when, Morges and I both kind of said to each other, Ivan Gobrach. And Morges is German, so that ought to tell you something like that. And I'm, well, mostly German. So I think that was a really neat piece that was done. And then Paul Rick Delaney's character as Cilian Murphy's brother, how he starts out as the gung-ho, borderline jingoistic Irish person devoted to the cause, the steps that he takes, the trials and tribulations that he experiences, both with him and his mates, and with Cilian Murphy, and how they shared, and just how his overall ideal was not changed per se, but it kind of just it hit a wall. So it was that really neat progression. But I mean, he still was embracing it. It wasn't as profound as Cilian Murphy's character, but it still was steady up the line as they saw more and more atrocities, as they witnessed more and more issues with themselves, with their friends and family and whatnot. I mean, it was just so well done. And now, of course, I'm going to go into the plot of the movie. So, spoiler alert, switch off now if this is something you don't want to witness. But work with me here, because this is really going to go into the overall intensity of the movie. Because, like I said, after the first 5 minutes, which just had the cast and the characters and whatnot, it was from start to finish nonstop grit, violence, and overall stuff that it was like a train wreck. I wanted to look away so much, but at the same time I could not, because it was that fine line between oh my god and you got to keep walking, you got to see just how far this goes, what's going to happen with all the characters. I mean, because I really did feel this deep-seated affection for Cilian Murphy's character, for Cilian Murphy's girlfriend Shanae, for their family, for Pádraig Delaney at most points, for Dan and his character and whatnot. It really worked out well. So, like I was saying in the beginning, Cilian Murphy's character was going to be a bright Irish doctor, but he witnesses several things that happen in the beginning during the Irish Revolution, particularly the British black and tans abusing certain villagers, verbally and physically punching them out, and to the point where one of them tries to start a fight with the British, one of Cilian Murphy's friends, and he dies. He gets killed by the British for that. There's another scene in the beginning where Dan was a train man working for the Union, and he was saying that the British couldn't get on because they had weapons, which was standard by the Union, and they beat him to the ever-loving snot out of him. And that was the snapping point for Cilian Murphy's character, because he's witnessing this. He witnessed all this, and he's like, okay, I cannot sit idly by and take this. So then he signs up for the Irish Resistance, the IRA, with his brother, Pádraig Delaney, leading the rebels against the British. And they do all sorts of guerrilla warfare. They train up in the mountains to make sure they're prepared for the guerrilla warfare. And I made a comment to Morges about this, because the way they were doing such their own non-standard fighting, it reminded me a lot of Francis Marion, the swamp fox of the Revolution, how he kind of, no pun intended, revolutionized this unorthodox method where it wasn't standard battlefield tactics, it wasn't standard gentleman battles, it was true person against person, results be damned, very Machiavellian, the ends justify the means and whatnot. And there's a few scenes where they get captured by the black and tans, and Cilian Murphy's character basically poses as his brother, because his brother was leading the rebellion in that particular area of Ireland, and gets tortured so badly. We're talking pulling out fingernails. You see the pulling of the fingernails. It was pretty intense. Ugh. And getting busted out by an Irish guard who was currently working for the black and tans. Could have been out of fear, could have been out of gold, who knows. But the guard basically switches sides and joins the revolution and frees them. And that's when things really take off. They do all sorts. They intercept weapons. I'm not saying they verbally torture a couple of upscale Irish citizens who are basically working for the black and tans, or kind of colluding with them, so to speak, and whatnot. And it escalates and escalates and escalates to a point where the black and tans go to the house where Shanae, Cilian Murphy's girlfriend in the movie, and her family live, and they set the house on fire. Mind you, this has Shanae, her mom, and her very aged grandmother, dragged out, forced up against the wall, ratings, the whole 9 yards. And there's a scene where they cut Shanae's hair very close. I thought it was a scalping scene, And Morgues and I both thought this could have easily come into being a rape scene. And after watching Cannibal Holocaust, I did not want to see another rape scene ever again. Whether it's in a movie or on the news or anything like that, that sort of thing's not my bag, baby. And I think that's when Cilian Murphy's character took a complete, straight up, it's on now. But of course, like the history books say, it eventually led to a temporary truce. Now, whereas where the Irish, after the resisting and the rebellions and all, wanted to be a free country. However, the British say Ireland is still going to be remaining under the UK, but they basically are free. I forget what the term is for that, but it's like freedom, but not freedom per se. And of course, we see that in many other times in many other countries, Scotland, Mexican Revolution, that kind of thing. And whereas Cilian Murphy's like, not cool, that's not going to happen. Padraig Delaney's character basically like, you know what, it's the best it's going to be, so we might as well accept it. And that is where it kind of split off into two different parties. Cilian Murphy's character continues the revolution until Ireland can be its own free country and free of the British. Whereas Delaney's character basically becomes an occupation force. Not like a military police per se, but basically they were a lighter, more benevolent version of the Black and Tans. So, Cilian Murphy's character continues to train new members of the IRA and started doing more guerrilla warfare, except this is against his own country and his own people. And, we're talking dragging Irish soldiers now, supporting this armistice, this truce and whatnot, and saying that they could still live under British rule, but they'll be left alone, that kind of thing. It was very insane, because it's like you're turning on your brother, you're turning on your fellow man, your countryman, that kind of thing. And they're trying to grab more weapons and continue this. And Padraig Delaney's character is like, no, Cilian, don't do it. Don't do it at all. This is not what you want to do. We've earned our right, and that's how it's done. And of course, that's like, no, that is not. We wanted freedom, and we're still not free. But it comes to a point where there is a firefight between Dan, Cilian Murphy's character, and Irish soldiers now working underneath the Irish government, which contained a lot of former officers from the IRA during this time frame. And Dan sadly was killed, so Cilian Murphy's character completely broke down. He's like, you know what, I'm done. He got captured, and basically, while he's locked up, in the same cell he was locked up as when he was captured under the British rule, he was given a choice to either say where they've hidden a weapons cache, which will probably tip the scales in the opposition favor, using that term very loosely, and he would be released, he could live his life with Sinead, that kind of thing, but to see him devoted to that cause, he's like, nope, I would rather die. And sadly, his brother, Padraig Delaney's character, was the commander leading the firing squad after his death. And it ended on such a sad note where he basically went to Sinead's house to deliver a note that Cilian Murphy wrote before he died, explaining the situation, explaining that he loved her and he'll always be with her. And it ends on such a dark note where she kicks him out, saying she never wants to see him again. He leaves, credits. So you see where all this is happening, the intensity of this. There was no time to catch your breath. It was done so very well between how the characters work together, the plot, the moral dilemmas that happened throughout that, which were few and far between, but there were times where moral dilemmas popped up. Like, for example, Padraig Delaney's character versus Cilian Murphy during the latter half of this movie, or Cilian Murphy being offered the, hey, you can be free, you've just got to tell us the one thing. So sacrifice the weapons cache, sacrifice the cause, possibly sacrifice your fellow man, working still for the rebellion and for the resistance, or die fighting. I think a lot about, now in hindsight, about how that kind of relates to Victor Laszlo in the scene when he was presented said dilemma in Casablanca. And he's like, I could either do this and I could be fine, or I could give up the cause and lose so many people, or I could be sent to a concentration camp or be killed right here on site. So, very fantastically done. Everything was interwoven together so very well from one thing to the next. So once again, I encourage y'all, watch the trailer, watch maybe a couple of scenes. I'm sure they're on YouTube somewhere. See what you think, and if this is something that appeals to you, go out and see it. But like I said, the grit was gut-wrenching and heart-wrenching in various scenes. So you've got to go into this with an open mind and say, it's, you know, this has happened, it's happening all over the world today, so on and so forth. Overall, though, I really, really enjoyed this movie. I didn't really have any beef with this movie. Like I said, other than just some of these scenes were very hard to swallow. The thick Irish accents, but of course, once again, hey, it's an Irish movie, what are you going to do? And that sort of thing. And once again, the cinematography was nothing to sneeze at, but cinematography is only just one piece about what makes a movie great. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Have you seen this movie? Do you think that you're going to go see this movie? If you do see this movie, what did you think of it? That kind of thing, or just anything in general. But other than that, y'all have a fantastic evening, and I'll catch you on the flip side, alright? Peace.